there's something I want to say before anything else. If you're here, something hurt. Maybe recently. Maybe a long time ago and it still hasn't fully left. Maybe you've been carrying it so long you've stopped noticing the weight. It just became part of how you move through the world. I'm not going to tell you that pain is a gift. I know how that sounds when you're in the middle of it. I know how hollow that lands when you're the one who's been in it for years, not weeks. When people around you have moved on and you're still quietly holding something that never fully resolved. What I am going to tell you is something more specific than that. Something that took me longer to understand than I like to admit. Pain that isn't metabolized doesn't disappear. It relocates. It moves from the place where the original wound happened and it settles into the way you make decisions. Into the connections you accept. Into the way you speak about yourself when no one is listening. Into the ceiling you set on what you believe you're allowed to have. And the reason most people never actually transform their pain, even the ones who have read every book, done the therapy, built the spiritual practice, is because they're trying to move past it before they've understood what it was made of. You cannot transmute something you haven't fully looked at. That's where we're starting today. I want to introduce you to a distinction that changed how I think about everything I went through. There is a difference between pain that breaks you down and pain that breaks you open. They can feel identical in the moment. Both of them level you. Both of them take things from you that you weren't ready to lose. Both of them leave you standing in the middle of something that looks nothing like the life you thought you were building. But their direction is opposite. Pain that breaks you down moves inward and contracts. It narrows your sense of what's possible. It teaches you that the world is dangerous, that people will leave, that you are fundamentally too much or not enough, depending on which version your particular wound delivered. It becomes a lens through which you filter everything that comes after. Pain that breaks you open moves outward and expands. It doesn't feel like expansion in the moment, it feels like destruction. But what it's actually doing is removing the architecture that was too small for what you're becoming. The question isn't whether your pain was real. The question is, which direction has it been moving in you? And more importantly, do you have a choice about that direction? You do, but not in the way most people teach it. Here's what transmutation is not. It's not deciding to feel grateful for the hard things. Forced gratitude is a bypass, not a transformation. If you have to convince yourself that something was a gift, you haven't metabolized it. You've just covered it with a different story. It's not healing fast. The speed at which you process something has nothing to do with how evolved you are. Some of the most profound internal shifts I've witnessed take years to complete. The ones who rush it are usually the ones who find it waiting for them around the next corner. It's not becoming someone who no longer feels the thing. The goal of transformation is not to become someone who has no wound. It's to become someone who is no longer run by it. There is a significant difference between those two things. A wound that runs you is one you haven't fully faced. It operates below the level of your conscious decisions. It shows up in who you choose, what you tolerate, what you reach for, and what you pull away from before you even realize you're doing it. A wound that no longer runs you is still there. It's part of your history. It's shaped parts of who you are, but it's no longer in the driver's seat. That's what transformation actually looks like. Not the absence of the scar that has become structural. Let me talk about the mechanism of this, because I think when people say, turn your pain into power, without explaining how, it becomes one of those phrases that sounds profound and means nothing. Pain becomes power through a very specific process, and it has 3 stages. The first stage is contact. This sounds simple. It is not simple. Contact means allowing yourself to fully feel what the experience actually did to you. Not the story you built around it afterward. Not the version where you were the victim or the version where you were strong the whole time. The raw version. The one that lives in your body, not just your narrative. Most people skip this stage. They go directly from the experience to the meaning they made of it. And the meaning they made is often either self-protective, I'm fine, I've moved past it, or self-punishing, this happened because of something fundamentally wrong with me. Neither of those is contact. Contact is the moment you sit with what happened and let it be exactly as heavy as it actually was. No heavier, no lighter. For some people, that moment takes years to arrive because the body protects you from what it doesn't think you can handle yet. And that's not weakness. That's intelligent design. But when contact finally happens, and you'll know it because it feels less like falling apart and more like something finally stopping the performance of being okay, that's when the process actually begins. The second stage is extraction. Extraction is the part where you ask a different question than the one pain usually generates. Pain usually generates, why did this happen to me? What does this say about me? How do I make sure this never happens again? Extraction asks, what did surviving this teach me that I couldn't have learned any other way? Not in a spiritual bypassing sense, in a very concrete, specific sense. The person who grew up in an environment that didn't see them clearly and survived it developed a particular kind of perceptiveness. They can read a room. They can sense what someone needs before it's said. They can identify when something is off in a system or a dynamic long before it becomes visible to others. Those are real skills, developed in real difficulty. And they do not disappear when the difficult environment does. The person who loves someone who couldn't love them back in the way they deserved and finally let go developed particular kind of clarity about what love actually requires. Not the theoretical version, the lived version, the one you only develop by having felt the difference between love that expands you and love that slowly erases you. That clarity is real, it is earned, and it belongs to you. Extraction is the process of consciously claiming what was built in the difficulty, not as a way of saying the difficulty was okay, but as a way of refusing to let it take everything. Because here's what pain that isn't extracted does. It takes the experience and leaves you with only the damage. Extraction takes the experience and makes sure you also keep what was forged. The third stage is redirection. This is where the power part actually happens. Redirection is when what you learned in stage 2, the specific capacities built in specific difficulty, becomes the material you use to move forward, not in spite of what you went through because of the particular shape it gave you. The person who learned to read rooms and sense what others need, that's not just a survival skill. In the right container, that becomes the ability to reach people in ways others can't, to say things that land, to create spaces where people finally feel understood. The person who learned the difference between love that expands and love that erases, they don't just protect themselves better in future relationships. They become someone who models a different way of loving, who refuses with quiet clarity to participate in dynamics that require self-erasure, and who, in doing so, gives permission to everyone around them to do the same. The sadness that came from being in environments too small for what you were, that's not just grief. That's also the precise source of your ability to recognize others who are being made small and to reflect back to them accurately what you see. This is what I mean when I say pain becomes power, not that the hard thing was secretly good, but that you, specifically you, with your specific history, built something in that difficulty that didn't exist before. And that thing is not separate from you. It is part of what you now have to give. I want to talk about something that doesn't get said enough in this conversation. Transformation is not a linear process, and it is not a destination. There will be days, even after you've done significant work, even after you've moved through things you thought you'd never move through, where something triggers the original wound and it feels as raw as it did in the beginning. That is not regression. That is the nature of deep material. It doesn't resolve once and stay resolved. It spirals. You return to it at different levels of your development, and each time you're able to see a layer you couldn't access before. The difference between someone who is transforming their pain and someone who is stuck in it is not that one of them has stopped feeling it. The difference is what they do in the moment the feeling arrives. The person who is stuck meets the feeling with the same story they've always told about it. The feeling arrives and confirms, this is who I am, this is what I deserve, this is how things always go for me. The person who is transforming meets the feeling with curiosity instead of conclusion. The feeling arrives, and instead of confirming the old story, it becomes information. What is this showing me right now? What part of this is old and what part of this is present? What does this feeling need that it hasn't received yet? That shift from conclusion to curiosity is one of the most practical things I can offer you, because it is available in any moment, including this one. Here's what I want you to leave with. The pain you've been carrying, the grief that never fully resolved, the anger that comes up when you least expect it, the sadness that lives underneath the surface of ordinary days, none of it is evidence that something is permanently wrong with you. It is evidence that something happened to you that mattered, and that you are the kind of person who takes seriously what matters. The work of transformation is not to become someone who no longer feels those things. It's to become someone who knows what to do with them. Contact, extraction, redirection, meet it fully, claim what it built, use what was forged. That is not a process that happens once. It is a practice. And like all practices, it gets more precise the more you do it. You are not behind. You are not broken. You are in the middle of something that is not finished yet. And the fact that you're still here, still asking these questions, still looking for the deeper explanation instead of the easier answer is not nothing. That is actually everything. Leave a comment if something landed today. It doesn't have to be much. I read every single one. Cheers.